Today I want to talk to you guys about drip irrigation and what works good, what kind of crops work well for drip irrigation and what kind don't. And I keep making the same mistake every year thinking that maybe I can find a way around it, but no, I haven't. And that one particular mistake is this arugula that I'm standing next to. Drip, in my experience, in my particular climate, with my particular soil, just does not work well with arugula. You get spotty germination and you get a weird yield where you have an inconsistency in the crop. And I can't tell you with absolute certainty why that is. My hypothesis is that your drip tapes just aren't getting enough coverage evenly on it. Another one that happens for as well is spinach, and I've got spinach planted here, and you've got some lines will touch directly on the row of crop, and it'll germinate it well to start, but it'll actually hinder its growth because it'll get too saturated on that line. And so the workaround for it is to hand water, and that's actually what I've been doing out here. It's in my front yard, so it's something I can do at certain times of the day, and I don't mind doing it. It's kind of a nice thing to do, but it doesn't always work that well. And so basically what I've discovered is direct seeded crops, especially greens. So the ones that I do mainly are spinach, arugula, red Russian kale, mustard greens. You get inconsistencies when you're doing drip with them, but there are variables there, because somebody might come at me and say, hey Curtis, I do these with drip and they work fine, and that's totally likely. Your soil and the climate you're in will have a big factor on that. I'm in a high desert, very dry climate, though we have had a wet spring here, but it's summertime now. It's full on summer. We're getting up to 30 degrees Celsius during the day, so it's hot. But with the direct seeded crops and greens, it doesn't work so well. Radishes and turnips work fairly well. Carrots don't work well. I do not like doing carrots with drip irrigation. The main reason for it, the drip irrigation sits on the soil, and when it's when water comes out of the drip, it sinks into the soil right away. It doesn't really stagnate on the soil very much. Depending on your kinds of soil, you'll get a little bit of spread. It also depends on the type of drip you're using. But with carrots, I find it really, really annoying, because once the carrots have grown, like there's like maybe 6 inches of foliage on top, that shades the bed, which is a good thing, but the underneath soil gets really wet. So when it comes time to harvest, the soil might look kind of dry on top, at least not saturated, but then you fork into the bed and it's really wet. It's almost muddy. And I find that really annoying for harvesting, because you get this crusty layer on top, at least with clay-based soils like I have. And it's a mess. It's a mess to harvest. Whereas an overhead irrigation makes it more consistent all the way through. So I'm way more of a fan of overhead irrigation for those types of crops. One type of crop that we can see here is my Salanova lettuce. This does really well with drip. I'm a huge fan of using drip for anything that has landscape fabric on it. So I've done, videos on this before. I've talked about this before. Click up here if you haven't seen the landscape fabric video. But, crops that have transplants in them and are under fabric, drip works fantastic for. The thing that's great about Salanova is that I want to harvest it dry. That would be ideal. That means it's going to be less muddy. There's no mud with this because the irrigation isn't dropping down and then splashing mud up on the ground. It's clean and it's dry all the way through. So actually, when it's not rainy season, there's less slugs in there than there would be other types of crops that have overhead irrigation. So that's a big plus for us as well. Other crops that drip works great for: tomatoes. I wouldn't do tomatoes any other way. When you have the drip on the tomato, it keeps the plant dry. If you've got water dripping on your tomato plants, it can cause problems with your pollination. It can, when you have water on the flower, it can keep the flower closed, and it reduces its chance of being pollinated. So that can actually affect your production quite significantly. So Same for other types of nightshades in this family. So tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, I wouldn't do any other way than drip. Basil is a fantastic crop to do with drip, and in fact I wouldn't do it any other way. With basil, you want to harvest the crop dry. So because if you harvest it wet and it goes in the cooler, it'll blacken. The little drops of water on the basil leaves will turn black and it'll spoil your crop. So I wouldn't do it any other way. You know, there's other crops that do well with drip, like beans. I don't grow beans commercially anymore, but drip does well for beans. Celery is a great crop for drip. A lot of the long season basically a lot of long season crops like that have 60 days or more to maturity, if they're a transplant, I'll do them drip. So that could be green kale, could be kohlrabi, like I said, celery, you know, it could be beets. Aren't so bad with drip, especially if you've got the beets near each of your drip lines. So like I will sometimes do beets and 4 rows, and so if I have 4 rows of drip, that works out well. So just basically anything that is a transplant, you know, patty pan squash, any kind of squash is fantastic with drip. Especially crops where you have a wide density. So squash is one example like there, you know, 18 inches in rows 3 feet apart. Drip is perfect because then you're not watering areas that don't need water and they're just going to grow weeds. I mean, my solution for that is to lay down landscape fabric and have holes for the plants and then the drip irrigation right underneath the fabric. So that's how I do it. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. I've got a busy day out on the farm and I'll make another video for that. But I hope you guys have a fantastic day and good luck with sorting your irrigation out. Talk to you later.